given the state of the world economy, bombing Iran, which would be a major league undertaking. It's not like you go in there, there are 2 pinprick attacks, and that's the end of the story.
Well, recently, John Mearsheimer was on Judge Napolitano's podcast, Judging Freedom, to talk about Trump's Israel policy, the potential for war with Iran, and really maybe some of the surprising things Trump has done recently in relation to the Middle East. So Mearsheimer's an expert, one of the best foreign policy minds as far as I'm concerned. Don't agree with him on every single thing, especially on China, but this is worth listening to. Let's watch and let's react.
It was reported by the BBC and by The Economist magazine that Netanyahu was bitterly disappointed. At the time when Trump had imposed the tariffs, he wanted an exception for Israel, and Trump said no. He wanted Trump publicly to admonish President Erdogan of Turkey, and Trump said, he's my friend, why would I admonish him? And most importantly, he wanted Trump to commit to a war in Iran, and instead Trump announced that the United States would be negotiating directly, face-to-face, with the Iranians. Some of our colleagues have commented this was a head fake. That is, this was a concocted between Trump and Netanyahu to give the Iranians a false sense of security. Some believe that he actually stood up to Netanyahu. What is your thought on this scenario as I've described it, Professor?
Well, I thought that Trump was saying nothing new. He's long argued that he wants to negotiate a settlement to this conflict. That's his preference. It's obviously never been the Israelis' preference, but it's been his preference from the beginning. It was Biden's preference. And Trump has said that if he can't get a negotiated settlement, that he'll attack Iran. And I don't think that changed. One could argue that he was a little bit more enthusiastic about negotiating on Monday than he had been beforehand, but I really didn't see much difference. So I think we're basically at the same point we were before the Monday meeting.
Yeah, I think I essentially agree with Mearsheimer here. The tariff thing, that turned out to be a ruse outside of China anyway, so I don't think that really has any bearing here. As far as Iran, you know, Trump said all sorts of things. He saber-rattled with Iran, said that he wants to negotiate with Iran. You know, that kind of comports with how he acted in the real estate market, basically, you know, doing this bellicose rhetoric and then trying to get a better deal because of it. So, I don't know. I would say the bombing in Yemen speaks more volumes about what his intentions are because, you know, he wanted to send a signal to Iran, especially in his social media posts following up from that. And for Netanyahu to be disappointed in anything Trump's done is absolutely crazy. Netanyahu is, outside of Zelensky, the biggest American welfare mom on the planet. He's gotten whatever he's wanted from America, military support, financial support to the tune of $4.3 billion a year. And then last year, I think something like $25 billion, maybe $20 billion. So he has unlimited support from the U.S. The U.S. inherits all of Israel's enemies because of it. Netanyahu has absolutely no room to be upset about Trump, especially because Trump exemplifies the Israel lobby. He's paid off by the Israel lobby and Miriam Adelson.
Before we get to Iran, here's President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu in the Oval Office after their 3-hour lunch meeting. I'd like your thoughts on how fundamentally ignorant one of them is and how fundamentally deceptive the other is. Chris, cut number 10.
Do you think blocking humanitarian aid is also an effective pressure tactic?
Well, you know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think it's an incredible piece of important real estate. The level of death on the Gaza Strip is just incredible. And I've said it. I don't understand why Israel ever gave it up. Israel owned it. It wasn't this man, so I can say it. He wouldn't have given it up. I know him very well. There's no way. They took oceanfront property and they gave it to people for peace. How did that work out? Not good. They gave it away for a good intention, and it didn't work out that way. And
I think what the president talked about is, first of all, to give people a choice. You know, Gazans were closed in. and every other place, including in arenas of battle, I mean, whether it's Ukraine or Syria or any other place, people could leave. Gaza was the only place where they locked them in. We didn't lock them in. They're locked in. And what is wrong with giving people a choice? Now, we've been talking, including over lunch, about some countries, I won't go into them right now, that are saying, you know, if Gazans want to leave, we want to take them in. And I think this is the right thing to do. If you give, you know, it's going to take years to rebuild Gaza. In the meantime, people can have an option. The president has a vision. Countries are responding to that vision. We're working on it. I hope we'll have good news for you.
Well, there's so many lies in that, it's incredible. I want to hear what Mearsheimer has to say about it, but it's not true that, you know, this was Israel. Israel occupied Gaza in 1967 in the war, and then set up, I think, 21 different settlements there, occupied it until 2005, and when they withdrew, they still lock it up. They hold the Gazans in there almost as if it's a quasi-open-air prison, where they have a blockade that stops food and medical equipment from getting in, very strictly enforced boundaries for leaving and entering. It takes a lot, and people have to withstand a lot of scrutiny to get in or out. And they're just second-class citizens in just about every imaginable way. So yes, you do, Netanyahu, lock them in Gaza. And that's just unquestionable. You can't refute that. And it astounds me how these people can lie through their teeth so profusely. Trump too.
So Gaza belonged to the Israelis and they gave it to the Palestinians. The first time I've ever heard that. And the Palestinians were locked in by somebody other than the Israelis and the IDF. It's the first time I've heard that. Your thoughts?
Well, I think with regard to Netanyahu's comments to start with, then I'll go to Trump. I think it's just a series of bold-faced lies. I mean, the Palestinians live in a concentration camp. And who put them in that concentration camp? There's just simply no question. It's the Israelis who put them in that concentration camp. And before October 7th, the Israelis would occasionally go in there and do what they call mowing the lawn, where they'd go in and murder a significant number of Palestinians to send them a message as to who is the boss. In fact, in at least two of those mowing the lawn operations, they killed more Palestinians than Israelis were killed on October 7th. And then, of course, since October 7th, what's been happening is Israel has been committing genocide in Gaza. This is the story. The idea that Ariel Sharon pulled the forces, or pulled the Israeli forces and the Israeli settlers out of Gaza, and that he was hoping to turn it into the land of peace, is a joke, right? His advisor at the time said that our aim is to put the Palestinians in formaldehyde. That was exactly the word that he used. This idea that the Israelis have benign intentions towards the Palestinians is ludicrous. What the Israelis are interested in doing is getting rid of every last Palestinian, driving them out of Greater Israel, which of course includes Gaza. So what Netanyahu said is just basically a pack of lies. What I find quite amazing is that the media doesn't expose this, the mainstream media. He's allowed to get away with this nonsense. Anybody with a college education should know that this story or set of stories that Netanyahu is telling are a bunch of bold-faced lies. But no, he gets away with it. Nobody calls him on the carpet. This is the way we operate when it comes to
Trump.
The only thing I disagree with Mearsheimer there, and he's totally on point in every single way up until he says that he can't believe the mainstream media doesn't call this out. Well, the mainstream media is totally operated by Zionists that cover up from all of Israel's misdeeds, not just this, but other things Israel has done. So for Mearsheimer to be surprised about that, that's actually a little surprising to me. But look, the same body that Zionists point to legitimize modern Israel, that's the UN, because Israel was created through UN resolutions and the enforcement thereof. It was a grand land redistribution project. They cite that They just refuse to look at that organization's resolution 242, which condemned their settlement of Gaza and their occupation of Gaza after 1967 as a complete injustice and violation of international law. So very selective interpretations of Israel's legitimacy, ignoring one resolution but acting like the other is complete gospel.
Trump is getting away with ignorance of such a magnitude that if this were a basic course on the geopolitical history of the Middle East, you'd probably flunk him.
There's no question. The problem with Trump, let me make 2 points about Trump. The problem with Trump is he makes misstatements or false statements or tells lies at such a rapid pace you can't keep up with them, right? He makes one false statement, you try to correct it, and he's on to another one. But the more important point, in my opinion, about Trump is that he has no moral compass. How can anybody who has watched what's happened in Gaza, whether you want to call it genocide or mass murder, just watching what has happened, and you listen to him describe the destruction, he's fully aware of what's happened there, treat it in such a cavalier way. How is it that he doesn't have any basic sympathy for the Palestinians? I just find this hard to understand on a purely human level. It's really quite remarkable, and I think it says a great deal about him as a human being.
Here he is again talking about turning Gaza into a freedom zone owned and occupied by the United States. Cut number 1.
Well, you know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think it's an incredible piece of important real estate, and I think it's something that we would be involved in, but having a peace force like the United States there controlling and owning the Gaza Strip would be a good thing, because right now all it is for years and years, all I hear about is killing and Hamas and problems. And if you take the people, the Palestinians, and move them around to different countries, and you have plenty of countries that will do that, and you really have a freedom zone. You call it the freedom zone, a free zone, a zone where people aren't going to be killed every day. That's a hell of a place.
This is just so crazy and totally in line with Trump's rhetoric. And as Mearsheimer said, Trump says one thing, then says the other, but we really have to just pay attention to his actions. And his actions are supportive of Israel no matter what. No matter what. So this freedom zone thing is just crazy. I'm not sure the angle he's going for here, what advantages there are for foreign policy. Sometimes I can get a sense of, well, hey, maybe this might be a decent negotiating tactic, but who's he trying to negotiate with here for a better deal? He's not going to have Netanyahu turn against him. And he's not going to turn against Netanyahu because Adelson owns him. So this doesn't make any sense. The freedom zone thing is preposterous. And peacekeeping troops, yeah, that never went badly, especially when they got sent to South Vietnam. That never spiraled into a catastrophe, directly a hot war where 50,000 American forces died in or anything like that.
Only thing he didn't say is that, and then my son-in-law can develop the real estate.
Yeah. The question you want to ask yourself is who's doing the killing here?
Of
The
course.
Palestinians have done some killing for sure, but the amount of killing they've done compared to the killing that the Israelis have done there's a gross disparity there. It's an open and shut case. If he wants to turn the Gaza Strip into a giant zone of peace, the biggest problem he faces, or the biggest obstacle he faces, is not the Palestinians, it's the Israelis.
That's absolutely true, and there's no military solution to it, no peacekeeping force solution to that anyways, only a political solution, and that's a Palestinian state. But that's unacceptable to Netanyahu, always was. That's why Netanyahu supported Hamas in the past, because he knew it would drive a wedge between the Palestinians, and then he'd have no one to have to negotiate with for a Palestinian state. So I don't think that there's any prospect for peace until that happens. I'm not saying it's impossible because, hey, you know, England and Ireland were at each other's throats even in recent times. Britain and India were, you know. Pakistan and India have been for a lot of their history. Japan and China have been for a lot of their history. So I'm not saying it can't happen, but I don't think it's going to happen short of a political solution that creates a state where Palestinians have total autonomy and a full stake in their future, not being kind of treated as animals under the guise of Palestinian anti-terrorism efforts that are just crazy and have killed a lot of innocent people.
But he, of course, is not going to admit that.
Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu a few hours after he left the Oval Office, addressing the Israeli people from the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. Well, you'll hear what he says. Cut number 2.
We agree that Iran will not have nuclear weapons. This can be done by agreement, but only if this agreement is Libyan style. They go in, blow up the installations, dismantle all of the equipment under American supervision, and carried out by America. This would be good. The second possibility that will not be is that they drag out the talks, and then there is the military option. Everyone understands this. We spoke about it at length.
Okay, so Netanyahu has been on the record time and time again as saying that Iran is 3 to 5 years away from acquiring a nuke. He said that in 1992. He said that in 1995. He said that in 2002. He said that in 2009. I think he said that more recently than that, and now he's essentially saying, well, Iran had a nuke before, so we have to bomb it into oblivion. Of course, he says it has to be the Libyan model because that's what Libya was, a regime change operation by the US and NATO, an offensive regime change operation. That's what he has wanted for years and years and years. He won't settle for anything less, and that's what he's trying to drag the US into. It's a huge mistake. This is preposterous. Let's hear what Mearsheimer says.
He starts out by saying, we agree. So the implication is President Trump agrees. Trump agrees to emasculate Iran so that it would become like Libya. Remember how Libya ended? Remember how Colonel Gaddafi was publicly butchered after Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama bombed the most prosperous country in Africa?
And by the way, what's happening in Libya now? Open-air slavery markets after that. That's the fruits of U.S. regime change operations.
I'll let you take it from there.
Well, North Korea, which developed nuclear weapons, unlike Colonel Gaddafi, has done very well with a nuclear deterrent. And the truth is, from an Iranian point of view, they would have been much smarter to have developed nuclear weapons a long time ago. But look, here's the big issue with regard to Iran. It's not a question of whether they're now developing a bomb or not. I know a lot of people focus on that. The problem from the Israeli point of view is that Iran has the capability to enrich uranium and reprocess plutonium. The JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran, did not take away either one of those capabilities. That means that Iran has the capability to make a bomb. And what the Israelis are deeply interested in is taking that capability away. Now, Trump walked away from the JCPOA in 2018. He said it was an unsatisfactory agreement. That's because it left in place the reprocessing and enrichment capabilities. So the question you want to ask yourself, when these two sides start talking in Oman on Saturday, what is a possible deal they can work out? And the fact is, the Iranians have made it manifestly clear they are not giving up their enrichment and reprocessing capability. That is the brightest of red lines for them. So they're not giving that up. So what is Trump going to do then? Is he going to sign an agreement where they get to keep those capabilities? He's back to the JCPOA, which he said was an unacceptable agreement. So I don't see that there is a potential deal when you look at the substance of what that deal would look like. And that leaves Trump with no alternative, given what he's been saying, other than to bomb Iran. But the problem there, as lots of people are talking about today, is given the state of the world economy, bombing Iran which would be a major league undertaking. It's not like you go in there and there are 2 pinprick attacks and that's the end of the story. We're talking about a massive air campaign that would cause a lot of destruction in Iran. And then the Iranians, of course, would retaliate. And what would be the consequences on the world economy? One can't say for sure, but one can tell plausible stories where this turns into a real nightmare.
Yeah, how about $10 a gallon for gasoline in New York City and Chicago?
Yeah, absolutely. Mearsheimer is totally right on this. Is for those who aren't aware, the JCPOA was one of Obama's accomplishments, and actually I think it was probably the only great thing foreign policy wise Obama really did, because it eased tensions with Iran for really the first time to a small extent since the 1970s. And one of Trump's deeds was to essentially tear it up. He called it one-sided because of what Mearsheimer said. It kept in place the uranium enrichment project. But that's a red line. They're not going to agree to it, just for the same reason is Russia is not going to agree with allowing Ukraine into NATO. It's the same kind of concept. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with the Israel lobby begging Trump to bomb Iran. It'd be catastrophic not only for the economic ramifications like Napolitano is alluding to here, but also because so many U.S. forces are in the Middle East region because of our fruitless forever wars that the Washington regime is obsessed with. They could strike at a moment's notice on those bases and on those troops, and it'd be catastrophic. There's no sense in it. And this is crazy Zionist foreign policy that we want no part of.
Exactly. On top of all the turmoil, in the economy that is a result of these tariffs, this is not the time to bomb Iran. And of course, Trump understands that. But again, I ask you and I ask others, what is the deal that he's going to cut that's going to get us out of this mess?
Oh, maybe he'll get the Israelis to surrender the nuclear capability that they stole from us.
The Israelis are not getting rid of their nuclear weapons for the same reason we're not getting rid of our nuclear weapons, and for the same reason that the Iranians are not getting rid of their enrichment. And
so morally speaking, how can he sit next to Netanyahu and say the Iranians are not allowed to have a nuclear weapon when the gentleman, and I use the word loosely, sitting next to him has them, stole them, doesn't acknowledge them, and has signed no treaty regulating them?
Because morality doesn't mean anything to Donald Trump. This is what I said about Gaza. This is a man who has watched what has happened in Gaza. He knows full well what the Israelis have done to the Palestinians. And his attitude toward the Palestinians, is displayed in that clip you played earlier, is disgraceful. What else can I say? I don't think he has a moral compass. So I don't think it bothered him that he was sitting next to Netanyahu, who has control over a nuclear arsenal and pushing the Iranians away from one.
Yeah, Mearsheimer is correct, as he typically is. It's just so crazy to watch Trump say that there's so much death and destruction and problems in Gaza, as he did earlier in that clip. But then who's to blame for that? It's not mostly Hamas, and as far as I'm concerned, again, Hamas is barbaric. But Israel has killed tens of times the amount of people as Hamas has, and tons of innocents, and over 200 journalists since October 7th. The U.S. doesn't have to be embroiled with this. We don't have to go this way. The Israel first policy could die, as it, didn't even exist prior to the 1940s or 1950s. There's no sense for us to throw in our lot behind Israel. And the most crazy thing was to watch him sit beside Netanyahu and say, hey, I can't believe that you gave away Gaza. That was such a gracious thing, essentially, in 2005, referring to when that was an illegal occupation, even according to the same body that created Israel and redistributed the land to the Israelis in the first place. So I really hope a war with Iran doesn't come. Mearsheimer is right. This is not the same as carpet bombing just any third world country. They are an industrial power that can bomb our forces, U.S. forces in the Middle East that are there for stupid reasons, by the way. And for the same reasons that our naval vessels are blockading Yemeni ports, It's for Israel. So I hope the U.S. gets out of this, but I want to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with John Mearsheimer? Is Trump really saying anything new about Israel lately? And what do you think the chances are for an actual war with Iran or a big bombing campaign to happen from the U.S. soon toward Iran? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Take it easy, guys. Peace out.